Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com is brought to you by BASF.
Jason over here with RealAgriculture.com, and we're here for another episode of the Pulse School, and I'm joined by Robyne Bowness Davidson of Alberta Agriculture and Forestry here in Lacombe. How are you?
I'm well, Jason.
So today we're just going to get a general state of the pulse crop here in central Alberta. Not a good year.
Definitely challenging. I have to admit, 2019 was a challenging year for pulse crops, especially around the central Alberta area. And why? Simply because of the weather. We had a wet year with higher than usual amounts of rain, but more importantly, it was cool and cold. And pulse crops in general do much better when it's warmer and drier than it was this year. Peas especially do not like what we say wet feet. They don't like wet feet. They don't like sitting in water. They like to be in soils that are, better drained, and some of our lighter soils where there's not a lot of precipitation. So we definitely saw some issues in our peas this year. Having said that, they didn't seem to have any issues growing nice and tall. Like there was a lot of vegetative growth in our peas this year, but when push came to shove, they just did not produce the pods, and the yields were quite bad. Faba beans in comparison, they don't mind it, as they can tolerate more water. They like the cooler temperatures, but still, any pulse crop needs just a stress level. There has to be some stress that comes in later in the season that kind of pushes them into that reproductive stage where they start flowering, produce their pods, produce their seed. And this year, with the August and September being, especially wetter and cooler, it just didn't happen. So it's definitely been a challenge this year, for sure.
All right, so there may be a temptation in growers' minds to just quit with pulses altogether. This is a rough year. We've had a rough year.
Yeah.
That's it.
That's it.
But it's a little more important to take more of a long-term perspective when it comes to pulse crops.
Definitely. I understand the frustration. You're out there, you're trying to pick up a crop that's 6 feet tall and flat on the ground. It's definitely a challenge. You're dealing with field peas, or you're trying to deal with faba beans that it's the end of September and they're still green and they're just not drying down. So definitely some frustrations, and it is very tempting to just say, I am not growing these things again. They're just too much work. But it is important, Jason, to remind producers that we need to take a long-term approach to our farming. We cannot just continue to grow the easier crops, every single year. Definitely canola is, easier to grow than pulse crops, and our wheat and our barley, definitely. But in central Alberta, we don't have a lot of other options. And so pulse crops, if used in rotation, can definitely not only improve the land in general, but by growing other crops, you're actually supporting your canola crops and your wheat crops as well, because you're breaking their disease cycles. A canola wheat rotation is only going to lead to big trouble for canola and wheat. So to put a pulse crop in that rotation definitely spreads things out and overall keeps the farm in a healthier state of mind. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of options because of our shorter season. Soybeans is a crop that we've tried in central Alberta, and we've still found it to be a challenge. So that kind of brings us back to our peas and our faba beans, and in some of our areas a little bit more east, maybe some lentils. But it is important to remember that rotation, and being familiar with our fields and healthy soils.
So how would you suggest that farmers mitigate some of that risk that they're seeing, that they're taking on, or at least perceive to have taken on, when they're planting a crop that hasn't done well this year and they're looking towards next year?
Well, I would say to try to get as many tools in their toolboxes as they can. And what I mean by that is everything that you can do that can support the pulse crops that you might want to grow. For instance, if you've got a lot of perennial weeds in your field, maybe control them in the fall, so that going in there'll be less competition for some of those pulse crops. Choose your fields that are more suited. Make sure you're using clean seed, treat your seed. Control your weeds, all of those bigger picture things that you can do to just help make the pulse crop more successful in general. So anything that you can do. by controlling all of the other factors, you give the crops the advantage, and seeding as early as you can, appropriately right seeding rates, all of those things, all the what we call the general best practices. If you can do that and set your crop up for more likely success, then you might not be quite as frustrated. You know, I want to remind everybody that, you know, pulse crops are not bad every year. 2019 was a bad year, but the years leading up to 2019, we've had some fantastic yields and some great benefits to having pulses in our rotation. So don't give up on them.
So all about long-term perspective.
It's all about the long-term perspective and healthy farms and healthy crops in general, because that means money in your pocket. So for sure.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Robyne.
Thank you.